Alright, hi there and welcome to another video of Measureschool.com, where we teach you the data-driven way of digital marketing. My name is Julian, and on this channel we do marketing tech reviews, tutorials, and sometimes live sessions just like this one. So if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. Now we are live right now, so the most important part that hangs this all up is, does my audio work? So if you can hear me in the chat, then write that in the chat and I'd be very happy to see if everything works. Anyways, we have a slight delay, so just gonna continue and just let you know about our super chat feature. So we have super chat enabled. So if you don't know what super chat is, it's actually a little button in the chat. So if you click that little button with the $sign on it, you will be directed to Super Chat, which is basically a donation that you would be giving to our channel. So if you want to support what we are doing and being live here, then you can write your message in that little field and donate the money. And what is cool about this as well is that it puts your message on the top of the chat, and so I can read it. And today we are doing a little bit of a live session. So if you have any questions so far, then or about Google Tag Manager tracking in particular, then let us know in the chat and I'd be happy to answer them. Now, before we get started, I would actually like to introduce you to a new feature in Google Tag Manager, and that is the Google Analytics settings feature. Now, what is this all about? Let's head over to our little demo. Do here, just trying to get the techniques all running. Okay, can't hear me. Okay, we start over with this whole thing, and you let me know if you can hear me once I switch over here. All right, so now it should be working, hopefully. And can you guys hear me? Okay. Unfortunately, there's a slight delay here with everything, so I can't really see if this whole thing is working. But if you can still hear me when I go over to the screencast, then we should be able to go. Okay. Yes, working. Okay, so it's working. So I'm gonna go back to my little demo here. I hope we can get this demo this time started. All right. We're talking about the new settings variable within Google Tag Manager. Now, what is this new settings variable? It's for Google Analytics specifically, and this variable holds your Google Analytics settings. So if you go down here to user-defined variables, you can choose a new type of variable, which is the Google Analytics settings type. And what does that do? Well, previously, if we would build a Google Analytics tag, so let's do this really quickly. We have a GA tag for universal, and we deploy this on all pages. We would have our settings, universal analytics here, in the Google Analytics settings right here. We would have a field available. So this here is all new, but the Google tracking ID would be something that you would type in, or you would put it in a constant variable, and then you would define also your settings. Now here it gets tricky, because if I had, for example, the field to set option, let's say AnonymizeIP, and set that to true, and also let's say we have a custom dimension of the index 1 and the value also true. Let's save that. We add a trigger, which is our all pages trigger. Now, what if we would open up a new Google Analytics tag, for example, an event tag, and we also want to have that same settings in there? We would need to basically repeat our whole process. So we would need to go in and say UA, blah, blah, blah. And then we would need to put in our field to set options. These are not defined on a global basis. So if I wanted to have AnonymizeIP again in this field, and with this hit send, I would need to do this over and over again. That is really hard to maintain once you have a container with hundreds of tags, of Google Analytics tags, as you might have run into this problem already. So now we have a new variable type where we can simply save these settings. So let's go over and say these are my GA. This is my tracking ID. Let's put it this way. Okay, and as the configuration, I will go ahead and choose the Google Analytics settings. Here we go, and then I put in my tracking ID. And especially the cookie domain is very important. This was not previously defined, but now we can also put in our field to set options. So if you wanted to say, okay, we want to have AnonymizeIP, set that to true, and our custom dimension, which was 1, and also set to true. Then we can save that and go ahead. In our tags, we can now define in the first settings, which we already saw, that we don't want to override with our special settings here, but rather use our variable, our selected variable, which is this one. And now this will be applied to this tag. So a really cool feature, a really needed feature, because people were building hacky workarounds let's switch over here. People were building hacky workarounds with variables before. So if you wanted to get your UA numbers changed dynamically on which pages you would build a custom variable for this. So it was really something that is dearly needed, and now we have it in Google Tag Manager as well. So great addition, and will make our lives so much easier. All right, this was the first demo that I wanted to say. We will get into your questions right away. Before we if that works for you. On Wednesday you can join us, but this will not be open on YouTube, so head over to measureschool.com/dataLayer workshop and get signed up, and we'll get you figured out with the data layer. So we got all your questions about the data layer to that end. All right, that's it for my little introductory section here. And I want to go into some questions. I probably won't be able to answer all these questions. Okay, there's one question from Swanepoel already. What is AnonymizeIP? So in Europe or in Germany specifically, there were lawsuits because you are transferring private data. Basically, the IP address is something that you could identify a user uniquely with to the US, and then under US privacy laws it would be governed, which is not in the interest of the German consumer or the European consumer, let's put it this way, and that's why there were lawsuits. That was in 2010 or 11. So Google said, okay, we are going to build in a feature that actually prevents us to see the IP address. So you only send the first 4 or 5, I don't know, the first blocks of the IP address, so you can find somebody specifically by the IP address, or Google wouldn't be able to find them. And that's, by the way, is also something that is very much still a problem, because Google Analytics has a problem with sending any PII into Google Analytics is a very big no-go, which other tools do much better, such as Ecommerce, for example. Okay, let me see in our sheet here. We had some questions already come in through email, and which I wanted to address as well. So Joran asked how to measure screen sizes. So screen sizes is something that Google Analytics does already by default. So you can head over to your Google Analytics report. Let's go over here in our little demo, and you'll be able to see in your audience report, where is it? No, under technology here, we see mobile. Let me see. Yeah, we can already see if this came from a mobile, desktop, or other page. We can also see the screen size. Now this is a bit hidden, and I would also only be able to click around here. So here we have the browser. Here we have the screen resolution. So this is tracked by default by Google Analytics already. Now, if you wanted to send this with an event, for example, or if you wanted to build this into a special report, you can definitely grab that information via JavaScript as well and make it a little bit more useful. There is a great blog post. Let me just pull this up that I saw from Analytics Pros about screen sizes. All right, and here is a little bit different example on how you could be using this. So I found this really useful because they are actually sending it in to custom dimensions, so you could define what mode is the cell phone, for example, in when the user browses. So is it in landscape mode, or is it in full screen mode, square, portrait, landscape? So this is something that you would need to do on the tracking side, on the measurement side actually, and find out how you could be sending that information in. It's done with custom JavaScript, so Google Tag Manager would be a really good example for this. So Joran, I hope this answers your question. Let me go over to my sheet where we have a little bit more questions here from Adrian. With auto event tracking in GTM, is it necessary to create goals in GA to track events as conversions for lead generation? Now, with auto event tracking, auto-event tracking is, first of all, a feature of Google Tag Manager. Google Analytics has nothing to do with it. That's just the measurement side of how you can pick up an event or an interaction on your page and send it over to Google Analytics. Now, once it's in Google Analytics, you would be able to classify it as a goal. What that does is actually something that more or less is in every report or in the important reports within Google Analytics. So you would be able to classify that event that just came in as a goal, and then you could see, for example, in your traffic report, okay, how many people have visited my website and also took the action that I actually wanted them to take and reached my goal. So yes, it is, if you classify this interaction that you tracked with auto-event tracking as something important on your website and something that the user should do on your website in order to reach maybe a bigger goal, then I would classify it as a goal, but it's not necessary. You can always correlate the data and also say, because it's already in the system as an event, you could build a custom report and say how many people have have done that interaction within their session, for example. So it's not really necessary. The goals are just a classification or just a tag that you attach to an event, but it's not. It is something that's very useful if you wanted to say that this is very important for your interaction. All right, let's go over to Liz's question. Can you clarify you would need to include GA hit level fields with an event sent? Yes, so if you have a field to set options set within Google Analytics, and this is particularly true for e-commerce tracking events, for any kind of field to set events. It also depends on if they are session scoped or hit scoped. But for example, if you don't want the information to be sent with the full IP address, then you shouldn't send the full IP address. You should turn on the AnonymizeIP feature, and that needs to be done throughout all the different interactions that you send over to Google Analytics. This is particularly true for e-commerce events and also for the user ID. The user ID needs to be always sent once you have identified a user, and you can't be sending only some hits with user ID and some don't. Google Analytics doesn't really recognize then the user and says, okay, he sent it over once, and we will build that in for his session or for his user lifetime within our source. Cool. That is it with Liz's question. Then we have Ari's question. We had huge site speed issues. We tried everything from changing hosting, but we discovered it was simply related to Google Tag Manager. Wasn't GTM supposed to avoid performance issues? Yes, that is interesting. So I gotten some questions about this lately. I guess people were concerned, does this impact my site speed? Now, what you need to understand is Google Tag Manager is JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is interpreted by the browser and during the runtime environment. So once the page loads, if there's JavaScript that's loading and needs to be executed right away, it will do that. Now, that is a performance thing, right? So you need to download the JavaScript and so on. So site performance is also about how big are the files, how fast are they executed, and how is that handled by the browser. And so Google Tag Manager per se is pretty much safe in terms of how it's built. It's very performance oriented. And the other thing that I can say is what we can control are the bits that are placed within the JavaScript. So within a container. So if you have heavy loading JavaScripts within Google Tag Manager, Google Tag Manager will still be not able to speed that process up. It does asynchronous loading, so all the tags within Google Tag Manager are loaded asynchronously, so it doesn't block the browser from displaying your site and so on. But what we can, or the downside of that is basically we wouldn't be able to take a code and say I only want to put this into the footer, so it loads after the page was actually loaded. So that's a little bit of a downside. So I would check the codes that are actually inside within Google Tag Manager and find out if there's anything that's blocking or is impacting your site speed or your performance. Cool. Then we have, I hope that answers your question, Ari. Then we have issues question. Is it mandate to set an event for enhanced e-commerce setup? All right. Enhanced e-commerce tracking is basically, for people who don't know, it's basically a set of more data that you can send within e-commerce stores. So for example, product information and so on, into Google Analytics and have much more enhanced reports within your e-commerce tracking than it is the case with the normal e-commerce tracking or without e-commerce tracking. Now, there are different specifications. So in the normal e-commerce tracking, the classic e-commerce tracking, so to say, you would have a transaction hit that you would send over to Google Analytics. So the transaction hit actually is a special type. Now with the enhanced e-commerce tracking, and this is hopefully where your question comes from, your enhanced e-commerce tracking actually is based on either a hit or a hit is a page view or an event, or you could also send other types of payload over to Google Analytics, but I won't get into that right now. The most convenient form, though, is the event. So I would send over that whole event, that whole enhanced e-commerce tracking information with the help of events, because you would be able to make sure that your data is there already, and you don't have to attach it all the time to the page view, which can be risky once you go through enhanced e-commerce tracking installation, because if the data is not yet in a data layer, you cannot transfer it over to Google Analytics. So I would definitely recommend to send your Google Analytics enhanced e-commerce tracking hits over via an event. All right, let me go over to YouTube and see if there are any more comments. All right, so Ari said it's basically some of the tags aren't good. Not sure yet which ones, but I thought I just stop. That's basically it. You shouldn't. You should be still. Google Analytics doesn't make your tags faster. It doesn't make your site speed faster magically. It can do some things for performance. Once tags are not loaded asynchronously, Google Analytics will do that definitely. You could also put in some rules. So once the some data hasn't arrived yet, you would be able to capture that data and push it out after the data arrives, for example. But I wouldn't. Site speed is still something that is very much based on your servers. So if you have a more expensive hosting package or an server that is near the location of your user, I would say that's a big impact. Second is how your page is built. So that's something your web developer probably would need to take care of. And then the JavaScript is also something that you should take care of. But you already said that it might be, and it might have something to do with GTM. So I would look into that, and also the JavaScripts that are in there. Most of the JavaScripts nowadays, if you look at Facebook or Google Analytics, they all know that site speed is a big issue, and therefore they will try to make that make that very performance oriented, so people don't take it down, for example. So I couldn't imagine that it's because of these tags, but maybe because some vendor has a tag that he loads from his server in Australia, and suddenly you can't really get a tag over to Europe or to the US that quickly, and therefore your site speed is slowed down. Cool. If you guys, do you have any more questions? Right. What about labeling within enhanced e-commerce? Could you show us an example how you use the checkout labeling with funnel steps? So an example is hard to pull out right now. It's basically something that you would need to build into your data layer and then make sure that you send over the right information. I actually have a video where I show how I label information for an enhanced e-commerce tracking checkout, which is not based on enhanced e-commerce tracking. And this checkout, this video is basically saying, okay, we just take some events and send over the right information so it's interpreted as enhanced e-commerce tracking. And therefore we can use that funnel information. So that's something I can show you really quickly. I don't have the exact implementation here, but let's go over to our screen here again. And so for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, we are here in the Google Analytics demo account under enhanced e-commerce tracking, or in e-commerce tracking. They have a shopping behavior or checkout report, and there are funnel steps in here. So these funnel steps are pretty much open. Now, Google Analytics says this is enhanced e-commerce tracking, so you should be using it with e-commerce, but you would actually be able to manipulate this and say, well, how many people went to my contact form, how many people actually filled it out, and how many people then send it off and convert it, so to say, right? And that's exactly what I done in this one video. Let me just Google it. And that's this video here, where I basically show, okay, we need to watch this ad, how we can go through an offer. So for example, offer, apply now button clicked, and a session with transaction, which you can change this label here. But if you look past that, these are very, very flexible funnels, because you can basically define them through events. You just need to send over the right data layer information. And that's something I show in this tutorial as well, where, yeah, right here, you just send over the right funnel steps and attach that to your event, and then suddenly you can fill your funnel reports here if you have enhanced e-commerce tracking installed and so on, with your account information in Google Analytics, and then you get this nice funnel report. Now, by the way, this funnel report is super flexible, I find. That's why Google Analytics has built that in as a feature within Google Analytics 360, so you can actually build a multiple of these funnels, I think 20 or 10 or something like that. In the free version, you can only send in one Google or set up one of these funnels. And these funnels are much better than what you have in your funnel visualization here, which was always the given funnel that people looked at, and it has its downsides, let's put it this way, but what the biggest downside is that it can only work upon destination goals. So you need to have a destination goal which is tied to one URL, and then you need to put in your steps as a URL, and they will be identified as a step in your funnel, which is kind of not current anymore, because as you might know, URLs don't always change from step to step, especially when you have a one-page checkout. You would probably need to pull that into events, and therefore I would actually recommend to set up such an enhanced e-commerce tracking funnel, even if you don't have a e-commerce site running. And that's something that you can easily do with Google Tag Manager as well. So that's a tip that I would give, and if you want, you can check out this tutorial. Right, do we have another question? Let me see. Okay, have you had issues with the GTM app spot bot firing the Facebook purchase pixel and affecting Facebook ads performance? Ask Colin. No, I don't have any experience with that, I must say. That is something that's interesting, how maybe tags influence each other, right? So if the AppSpot bot does anything in particular that triggers the JavaScript of Facebook, then it could lead to some problems here. And the thing is that I would test it in a very, so if I would say, okay, let's look at this, I would set up an environment where it makes it pretty clear where I could identify these problems, because within a bigger website, an e-commerce store, and you have certain codes running, you have so many variables that could impact that Facebook pixel, right? And you know there's something wrong, but you couldn't quite figure it out. So testing it is one of these things that I do very often. I go in and basically set up a sandbox of a particular site and only test the Facebook pixel, so I know if this is actually working or not. But I don't have any advice at this point. Then I would just Google and find it out myself. So, but if you find anything out, then I'm happy to have you on the channel to do a video. All right. Let's see. So Kam asks, I'm struggling to find content on dataLayer, specifically on setup examples and code linking back to GTM for forms. Please make a video about that, probably. Yes. Successful submitted, failed to submit. Okay. Yes. So first of all, you need to understand the data layer. And we have something in our course, in our GTM Essentials training, but we also run a workshop, which I can pitch you right now again, on Wednesday. So the same time on Wednesday, but you need to register for this. So go over to measureschool.com/data-layer workshop, where we're going to discover what the data layer is all about really quickly, find out how the data layer works and how we could be pushing data information in, and how Google Tag Manager actually uses that. After that, you will understand auto event triggers much better. So what does an auto event trigger actually do? It pushes data into the data layer. Now, how it behaves is sometimes different, and for forms, for example, if the form is not coded correctly, or not, I wouldn't say correctly, but if the code, the form is not coded in a way that actually works with the event trigger, then you're out of luck. And therefore, an auto event trigger is not always the best opportunity to track an event, if it was submitted or not. So maybe you need to custom code a custom event listener. Like, that's pretty old school, but that's the most advanced, or that's the most robust solution, I would say, than using an auto event trigger. Auto event triggers have been built for very mundane purposes, to install event tracking easily, but obviously, based on all the techniques that are out there and all the different implementations that are out there, Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager team built this auto event trigger to actually pick up this event based on the best practices that are out there. So you can't really say, okay, this doesn't work on my side, or it will always work. You need to adjust it to your needs, and possibly also need to build your own event listener to work with your form. All right, what's the time? I got a few more questions that I can take in. Eric asked, is there an alternative way to the content grouping to analyze subsets of pages or site directories? You think that use segments is a good idea? Well, segments aren't really a substitution. Let me just tell you about content grouping. Now, for the people who don't know what content grouping is, if we just look into our Google Tag Manager account again, we have obviously our site content here. And this can be grouped into certain areas. So we have here a content grouping that we can say, okay, which product categories do these pages belong to, right? So we could say, okay, all these product pages belong to apparel, and therefore they are they belong to this group. And these groups can be defined pretty easily within your admin section, either on the measurement side or through Google Tag Manager, through Google Analytics directly. So for example, in the well, here I can't see it because this is not my account. Let me go over to this account, possibly. Let's go to this account. Yeah, you have here the content grouping option. Let's take this one away. And the content grouping option actually lets you define by tracking code. This is what you can do through Google Tag Manager. By group using extraction. Well, the extraction is a hard word, where you basically take the page title or screen name and can define a rule, and here also a rule set that you could define again. Now, as I said, content grouping can then be used within your reports, in your behavior reports, and made useful for you. And really, it is really, again, a basic label that you attach to your page view. So you say, okay, this page view belongs to this group. And a label, a dimension, you could also call it a dimension. You could also, you could also think about, like, if you have a spreadsheet that has a lot of different rows, and each row represents a hit, you would have just another column that says, okay, this is the page view, this is the content grouping column, and I will put apparel in there. So later, you can slice and dice your data this way. You can do that in custom segments, you can do that in your reports, you can download the data and download this content grouping as well for page use. This is not for any kind of sessions or so, right? Now, this can be very valuable. I would say everybody should do it because it's a built-in feature and not too hard to set up. But an alternative, so I don't know, an alternative would mainly be if you would take this information and not push it into, or if you wanted to push it in multiple content groups and you only have, I think you have 5 available or something like that, then you could be using custom dimensions. Now, custom dimensions is a feature that you need to be sending in via the tracking code or via the measurement side. So you need to be setting that in up in Google Tag Manager if you wanted to send in content groups as a custom dimension. That's the alternative, really. Well, I'm happy to take another question if you have anything to follow up or if I misunderstood your question. Okay, cool. Harry gave us a super chat. Thank you, Harry. $5. So you will be up there for a while, I think. On WordPress, a plugin versus GTM and heuristic about performance. Yes, I would say there was a great table how you can install Google Analytics, for example, right? You could do it manually through the theme. You could, which this is sometimes hard to do because you don't have access. You could do it through a plugin, which is very convenient because you just set it and forget it. And you could do it through Google Tag Manager, which needs a setup, and then you need to go through all these hoops to make it work. But it's maybe more robust. So what are the advantages or the disadvantages of this? Well, I would say that setting it up through a hard-coded on the page is a very old way to do things, right? It might be that you have more control over how your site is loading in that moment. So if you really wanted to place the Google Analytics code in the footer, which I wouldn't recommend, then you could be doing this, but it you have much more control. This would be an approach that I would probably not recommend, but I would probably tell a solopreneur who doesn't want to learn Google Tag Manager, has a website, a blog, and wants to install Google Analytics, tell him, okay, just place the JavaScript here and you will set and done. Then the next option would be a plugin. Now, plugins are great for use cases, and this is what I said earlier with the auto event triggers. These are great when your site isn't customized at all. So especially like plugins that I've worked with, for example, Thomas Geiger has a great plugin for Google Tag Manager that most of the times works because I have a very controlled environment. My demo shop is basically a WooCommerce installation that I hadn't customized. I didn't put anything in, didn't change anything around in the template. But once you do that, it might be that your plugin suddenly doesn't work anymore. And it makes it maybe also hard that, you know, a lot of systems are working together. So if WordPress gets updated and the plugin is not yet updated, then you need to wait till the implementation is done. You're basically outsourcing the development, the feature set, to a plugin. So is that best practice or not? I would say there are convenience factors there that I can't really deny. There are definitely advantages when you don't have to hire or spend any money on a developer. And then there is obviously also the Google Tag Manager way, right? And now Google Tag Manager is really great if you have a team working on your site and there needs to be changes made often to tracking codes, right? So if you only have one code, it might not be worth deploying Google Tag Manager and deploying your one code through it. But if you want to be future-proof, if you want to be fast in your deployment, if you don't want to be dependent on your developer to doing this, then it might be a great opportunity to install Google Tag Manager. This is what I would say. Yeah, there's a balance there. I wouldn't say one or the other is the best. I obviously would prefer Google Tag Manager, and if I would deploy, or if I work with a client, I don't accept it anymore to deploy plugins. I don't accept to deploy tracking codes anymore manually on a page. Okay, let me take a sip of water here and just look through the chat again. All right. T asks, is it possible to break down Huyen, Vietnamese probably. Is it possible to break down the conversion of the product list performance in e-commerce Enhance into demographic and interest? So you have a product list, right? Now a product list, or a product per se, doesn't have a demographic or interest. Only the users that have visited these pages do have that, right? So what you could do is basically build a custom segment and find these users who have viewed a certain product who have viewed a certain product which belongs to a certain category within your reports, and put that into a custom segment, and then you could also retarget it, for example. But in the report itself, probably not. Probably you have tried it out and couldn't make it work because the product report or the performance report is product scoped. So there's a new scope through enhanced e-commerce tracking that basically is just for products. So there are 4 different scopes in Google Analytics. There's the hit scope, the session scope, the user scope, and then the product scope. And it's just not in the same scope. So no, you probably couldn't bring these together except of like custom segments and looking at the session scope, for example, or the user scope, and saying, okay, how many people watch this product, view this product? That is the question. Okay, Katarina asks, this will be our last question. Let's see. With the new Google Analytics settings variable you demonstrated at the beginning, does it mean we should create it now and update all our existing GA tags in GTM? I don't have a best practice for you just yet, because this is brand new. This basically came out yesterday, or I could also only play with it today. If you start out a new Google Tag Manager account, a new container, yes, I would definitely use it. If you have an old container, I would look into the settings of everything and update those, because it just makes it easier to update in the future. If you have a container that you don't touch often and it just sits there, and just remind yourself that once you touch it again and say, okay, I will build in this custom dimension, or I will change this tracking code around, then maybe you should be thinking about how you could update all the tags at this point. So that's my recommendation for this. Do we have another question? For AdWords, if I use GCLID, okay, how can I make GTM give me that when people fill in a form or make a purchase? Thanks for your answer. Okay, so the GCLID is an ID that is attached to AdWords. So now every AdWords person will scream. Let's put this at, okay. I'm in a German. Okay, let's click on Check24 here. And we will see hopefully a GCLID. Right here. This is a unique string that is attached to an ad, basically like UTM parameters as you have them in Google Analytics. Now the GCLID is specifically for Google AdWords. So Google AdWords will be able to tie that back to your Google Analytics account and know which ad is clicked, if you convert, and so on. Now this ID is basically useless, I would say, for us, because we can't tie it back in Google Analytics or in Google Tag Manager. We can't really see where this originated from, or what this belongs to, or what this actually means, right? Now there is a way to actually pull this out, and this is called the, let me see. Oh, you didn't see that. That is, okay. That's my fault. Let me do this really quickly again. All right, I'm going to click here on this ad, and you see in the URL up here the GCLID, and this is an ID that AdWords puts onto the URL. Now, AdWords uses this ID. We don't actually know what it means, or we can tie it back to an ad within Google AdWords at least, or in Google Analytics. Now, if you wanted to transfer that to Google Analytics, you could. There's actually in Google Tag Manager a variable which is easily configured, which is the user-defined variable. We have here a blah, blah, blah. No, this is a URL variable, right? And then a component type would be the query string. And as the query key, we would put in GCLID. And then you have it available as a variable and can attach it to tags, triggers, variables. But yeah, as I said, even if you have it in your Google Tag Manager account, I wouldn't be sure how you would be using it, because it's not something that is workable with, because I don't know, maybe you know something different, or people in the chat know something different. I'm happy to okay, what's the time? Okay, one more question from Joran. I answered your question at the beginning, Joran, but not about the scroll tracking. Scroll tracking, you would like to install that, I think, via LunaMetrics. And the results are not, it works in the debug mode, but the results are not shown in GA. So for the guys who don't know, LunaMetrics has a great library of different tag templates. Scroll tracking. Here we go. And you basically just need to download the container and then upload it into your Google Tag Manager account. So I'll try to do this really quickly. I don't know if it will work. Yeah, we just go to the admin section and import our container. So here we go. By the way, I always choose merge and then confirm. It will upload these tags. We can refresh our preview in debug mode and should basically already work. Okay, we need to have a tracking ID. Then we need to get a tracking ID. Let me go into one of our demo accounts here. That should do it. Oh, you can see what I'm doing again. Okay, I did not. Okay, this is unfortunate. Okay, again, we just downloaded here from LunaMetrics our whole thing. the container, we uploaded it into our Google Tag Manager account through the admin section right here, and we imported this whole container, and now we just need to change the Universal Analytics. Right, so no, not Universal Analytics, the LunaMetrics tracking script here. So here's the tracking ID, scroll tracking. Okay, and that should do it. Let's preview this. And we get a fatal error. This was not planned, but I'm gonna go over here. I think that should work. So we have the scroll tracking, and once we scroll down, we see events happening here. And once we click on the event, we actually see that our event tag fired. So then we can look into our tag assistant and actually see, did here an event fire? Yes. And the event was scroll tracking and so on. Now the problem that you have on your page is that you don't see any data in the real-time reporting. Well, the real-time reporting doesn't always work right away. So for example, right now, I'm not sure. We didn't install the right ID. So this is something you would need to do as well, have the right ID in here. Let's go over scroll tracking, and we enable the override here. Save this, refresh this, scroll down, get an event here. Okay, and we also have an event here. So let's see in our real-time reporting if you get an event. Nope. Now, I don't know why this didn't work. Now there are different debugging methods. I guess this would be helpful if you guys can download the GA debugger. This is this extension here. So you can open up the developer tools, as I'm doing right now, and then we can reload the page by clicking on this. We would see what event data was sent over to Google Analytics, and we could see any kind of error messages that occur. So here there was a event sent over. This is hit type event, and event category, action and label, and the event value was undefined. Okay, this shouldn't cause a problem. Now the non-interaction was set to true, so it might be that we need to click on last event 30 minutes, then you should be seeing your events. So they came in a little bit late, but here you go, they work. Now, why doesn't this work on your side? I basically went through a quick tutorial on how to debug, or what I'm looking for when I debug, so I hope this helps out. All right, let me see. Okay, last but not least, again, on Wednesday, we have a workshop running, which you can attend. You just need to sign up, and we'll explain everything about the data layer. Can't answer any more questions. If you have more questions, or if you see these questions, this live stream in afterwards, then leave your questions in the comments below. I might get to them and might be able to answer them. So with that said, let me just see. This doesn't work. Okay. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this little live stream with our questions. If you haven't yet, then consider subscribing right over there. Yeah, right over there. And I hope to see you next time, or next week, or in one of our videos. My name is Julian. Till next time.